All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Eric Reviews YouTube channel. And today we're going to be doing the positive and negatives, or the things I liked, the things I didn't like in episode 6 of the Percy Jackson Disney Plus show. And in today's video, I'm going to be honest. In the past, I've tried to keep it very balanced. This one's not going to be as balanced because episode 6 to me just didn't have a lot of things I really came away with. And I was like, yeah, I like this. A couple of things that just come to mind instantly is I think Annabeth came off as a little bit more charismatic. Again, they've continued to make her a bit more likable and a little bit closer to the version of Annabeth that's in the book. Had a big issue with that in the beginning of this show. They've started to somewhat fix it, but at other times they haven't. And we'll talk about that a little bit in the negative side of this as well. I think the actor who's playing or portraying Hermes is doing a pretty good job with what he's working with. Again, I don't like what they've given the character of Hermes. I don't think he was essential to this episode, but given that he's in the episode, I liked what the actor tried to do with the character. I think he did a very good job. I think a lot of the actual casting, the way they've tried to perform what I think these characters are like in the book, I think they've done a solid job, and that's not to say I liked Hermes in this episode, but I liked the portrayal of the actor was trying to do. Again, very convoluted, but I tried my best. I like the little bits of Grover that we got in this episode of trying to get him to be more of a character. We just didn't get a lot of it, and it didn't go anywhere. But I like that they at least tried to get something going with this character. It's been something I've complained about in pretty much every single episode of this show so far. They did try, so that was decent. I liked the idea of what the Lotus does to you. Like, how does it spread? Like, it's in the air and all that. I like the idea of it. I did not like the execution of it. The execution of it was pretty poor. Just based upon how it affects certain characters, how it doesn't affect other characters, doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. That didn't really work. I like that they did choose to include Grover and our crew breaking out the animals, because it's kind of a big part of Grover's character arc, even though it wasn't like a major part of this book or even the chapter. I do like that they included that because it is, you know, trying to build up the character of Grover. It's mainly a moment for him. So I'm glad that they at least tried to do it. So I thought that was good. I think the actors, again, for Percy, I think the actor who does Percy did a pretty solid job, as he usually does. I think he's probably the most consistent when it comes to how he's written and the actor portraying him and giving good performances. So again, sing his praises. He definitely has a bright future when it comes to acting. And I think that's where it stops for the good for me. The music I thought was also solid in this episode. I think it's been solid throughout all of the episodes. It just wasn't, this episode, you don't distinctively remember the music as much because there weren't a lot of those big moments. There weren't a lot of those emotional moments where we've had in the last couple episodes. So this one episode, you don't really feel the music as much because of what's happening on screen. It's kind of similar to like Rings of Power, where it's like not a lot happening on screen, so the music isn't really that big of a factor because there isn't a lot happening, right? So if you think about a good scene to represent what I'm talking about, like Order 66 has a certain tone that amplifies and adds to the tone of the movie and is very essential to it. Whereas like this, it didn't really feel like it was overwhelming or anything like that. It was just kind of there. So that kind of ends my good section. Again, very quick. There wasn't a lot in here. And even some of the good things that I talked about, they also came with a lot of bad that I'm going to talk about. So this is kind of the bad or questionable section of the video, and there's going to be a lot. Number one, I did not like the Lotus Casino or the hotel, the way it was set up, the way it looked, the depiction of it. In the book, it's more like a trap. It's laid for the Half-Bloods because it basically plays on what they want, their desperation, and lures them in. For instance, in the book, it has this game for Annabeth that she really loves because it's like designing in a whole city and architecture and all that stuff. It's real nerdy for her. Percy has all these arcade games that he never got to play as a kid and all that stuff. For Grover, it's got this game where he can basically shoot the hunters, and because he's all this, and you know, he doesn't believe in shooting animals and stuff like that. So it lures you in. Basically, it's basically allowing you, okay, you've been on the run for a few days, you've had no like peace, no sleep, really, no good food. And so it lures you in. It plays on that desperation aspect. And so that's really great. And the way the show does it is so dumb because it's like, it takes away any tension from the episode. Right away, you're going, oh, they know what it is. It's Grover expositioning. It's just handled very poorly and executed very poorly. And even then, one of the things I was talking about in the good section, the ideas is like, the idea that it's in the air, but the problem with the whole idea that it's in the air and it makes you stop remembering stuff is it only affects certain characters, and then the rationale to lazily try to explain why it doesn't affect Percy and Annabeth really is because they were together. They had each other. Which doesn't make any sense in my opinion, right? If it's in the air, it's affecting both of you equally, right? You're going to both have that same effect, so it's just very lazily done in my opinion. And so that's part of it. And the reason, again, why they are not affected, because somebody has to talk to Hermes. If everybody gets into this trap, well, you're kind of screwed up. But then later in the episode, it tries to backtrack and say that, yeah, wait, it did affect Percy and Annabeth because they were in here for like a number of days. They're now past the summer solstice, the big timeline. And so that doesn't make any sense because at no point was Annabeth and Percy ever affected. So how is them walking, having a conversation, then talking to Hermes take up all these days? It doesn't add up. Whereas in the book, it explains it pretty clearly and pretty openly. It's like, yeah, they were having so much fun. They were distracted and they were lured into the trap and they lost time. Right? That's how it's described. Whereas here, it doesn't make any sense. How does the same amount of time pass for Grover, who's completely enthralled into the trap, and Percy and Annabeth aren't? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't logically add up at all. And we also even just look at the idea of separating Grover, Annabeth, and Percy. Well, I guess Grover from the other two. It's the same repeating issue from the last episode, where we're giving Grover away from our group for the majority of the episode. He has really nothing to do. Like, nothing gets paid off. Like, this whole idea of how Grover is not trusting his friends, or he, has some issues. None of that gets worked out in this episode. I doubt it'll get worked out by the end of the series. Hopefully it does. It's kind of more of a questionable thing than maybe a bad thing, but it's constantly leaving Grover out of the main story, so it makes him feel just irrelevant to the story. He's not needed. He hasn't done anything in this show so far since he tried to basically get Annabeth and Percy to get together and be actually working as a team in like episode 3. He's useless. You can almost take him completely out of the story since that point. The other part of this, the whole Grover plotline, which again, we paid the price in this episode for Grover basically being off by himself in the last episode, because the whole point of that was to have Percy and Annabeth be alone for this big moment to build their relationship, so we can't have Grover there. So because of that, we take away Grover's hero moments, and we have this whole journey where what is Grover going to do in this episode? It has to be something important. He figures out that it's Clarice that stole the bolt. And I know this might be more of a divisive one. It's not one maybe that you guys would critically think is bad, but to me, it's bad. It doesn't logically make any sense, given what the characters know, right? Given the characters know that Clarice is someone that is not like this. She's not someone that's going to steal things. That's just not her IO, I guess. It's not what she would do. It doesn't fit her personality, right? The only, I think, rationale that makes any sense is you're like, okay, Ares would want a war to happen, so he gets Clarice to do it because she is his daughter. And so Clarice would do it for him, maybe to try and make him proud or gain some favor from her father. Maybe. But the problem is then how does she execute that? It's Clarice. Like, she's not a thief. It just doesn't really seem to add up exactly, right? Like, it doesn't seem to make sense. And so we wasted the entire episode of 5 plot for Grover to get this, which didn't really make any sense in the first place, in my opinion, the way I interpreted these events. Again, my opinion, if you guys differ, let me know why you think so. It just didn't work for me at all. The whole idea of why they're going to the Lotus Casino or hotel to begin with also doesn't make any sense, because what is the whole point of this episode was they needed to accomplish a couple things. One, they needed to accomplish how do they figure out where the underworld is. 2, how do they get transportation to that said area into Santa Monica? 3, how do we implement the Lotus Hotel or Casino? Because if we don't, book fans will hate us. So how do we implement those 3 things in one episode? And simply, they overdid it. They did it completely wrong. Those 3 things are not that hard to accomplish in one episode, right? So the Lotus Hotel and Casino, you could do this exact same, but all you got to do is you add one little step in here. Just have, they find some poster on the wall, or because they're going around and they bump into some official, you figure out that there's this card that shows where the underworld is, where the entrance is. Fixes that completely. So now they need transportation. Have them just find a taxi, have them have basically what actually ends up happening where Annabeth steals Hermes' keys. Well, why don't we just have it to where why don't we just have it to where she steals someone else's keys? They're all basically zombies at this point anyway. It wouldn't be that hard to do. Steal someone's keys. They end up having to figure out how to drive anyway. Just have them figure that out, how to do that, and then have them just off-screen drive there. I get it that it's like, oh, you want to jump to place, and it's like kids driving all the way there kind of doesn't make any sense. Well, then you just go with the taxi option, right? Which is more or less what happens in the book. They take taxis or they take public transportation, but you've kind of screwed yourself because you implemented that the police apparently tracking all of that, which I guess, but it just kind of screws up your whole thing there. So that's why they had to implement this Hermes fast track car. Again, whatever. Other things I just don't understand why they did is they took major reveals from book 5 or book 4, both, and put them into this episode. It's like some of the backstory of certain characters shouldn't be being revealed here because it's essential to understanding their character later on. It's essential for the story of Percy. And so when you start bringing all that stuff into here, it's going to discount, if this show gets to a season 5, it's going to discount things later on. And so I hate that because it doesn't make any sense. And so then we get to I think this is one of my biggest complaints, is really the back end of this episode, is because what this back end of the episode does is it takes away, in my opinion, all the tension of the show. It takes away all of the building going on in this show, because the whole show's premise is about, we need to get this lightning bolt back to Zeus by this date. If we don't, war is going to break out and it's going to be the end of the world. Okay. That's the premise. So what does this episode do to unravel that? It says that they stay in this hotel for like a couple days way past the solstice. Okay, so what does that tell us instantly, given what the premise of the show is? War is already happening. The end of the world is now. It's happening right now. We're not preparing for war. It's happening. So already, right, when you now think about it and you go outside and it's like, this is not happening, right? It just seems like the world is still fine. Like, we're apparently all still preparing for war. That's what Percy's told at the end of the episode. Doesn't make any sense, because now you've taken your attention and gone, wait, they're not actually going to go to war then, because the deadline's already passed and they're still just sitting around doing nothing. So it takes away that tension, and it does it so unnecessarily, because the idea now is like, okay, well, the war is going to get full scale unless Percy gets it to Zeus beforehand. But you've already screwed it up because you've built it to where this timeline should be important, and timelines are very important in Percy Jackson as a whole. And that's why I find it so jarring that Rick would allow this change. So this didn't change. This change, basically, what I don't understand about this is this change negatively impacted the story. Whereas the change is not that dramatically different when it comes to just the wording and what its impact is on the story. It just takes what it already had and made it worse. So that doesn't make any sense to me. Then you have the ending of it where it's Percy thought he was meeting Poseidon or his dad, which was never said at any point of the show or the book. It's something that Percy just imagines in his head, I guess. That's basically what you have to go with, because there's no build up to it at any point. Like, Percy doesn't talk about it in the previous episode at all. It's not mentioned at all. It's just here to connect with Hermes and Luke's relationship, and it just seems almost out of nowhere. So Percy's already pissed off about that. But then Poseidon, just out of nowhere, is just like, yeah, Percy, go home. Like, you've already failed. But it's like, the war hasn't started because the writers are telling us it's not started yet. Percy's still on this journey and could save lives, save the world, and you're telling him to go home? It just, the writing is so bad. It's baffling to me, the decisions that they made at the end of this episode, because at this point of the story, all the pieces are in line. You don't need to start crafting new storylines or plot lines or all of that. Like, your character development should already be done. You're now basically paying off that character development. They did something else, which I think is questionable. I can't say it's bad yet, but given the way I think it's probably going to go, there's a minor change here that I think most viewers may not instantly recognize, but the idea that Percy now has 4 of these like pearls instead of 3 is actually very significant to a moment that Percy's going to have in the next like episode. That's very important to his character. It's a massive payoff to not only the prophecy, but also him as a person and his growth. So that's, I think, a little questionable. I don't know where that's going to go yet. Maybe it's going to be taken a different way than I think it's going to, which is very possible. So that's why I'm not saying it's bad already, but there's just so many I just think jarring decisions, and I didn't even hit all of them in this episode, but I gave you guys kind of my brief overview. If you guys want to see like my main thoughts, I would check out my actual main review that we drop every Friday after the episodes, which we will be continuing for episode 7 and 8, and then doing like kind of conclusion and looking forward to the next season. But this episode was definitely a downstep, right? When you look at the quality of this season, and again, I wouldn't say at any point of this season so far we've had like a very good episode, like a perfect episode. But it's like you've been kind of hovering, I think, for the most part of this season between a 7 and an 8. I think mostly a 7. I think one episode was an 8. And then you have this episode, which I think is just an absolute stinker, right? It's, for me, I rank it about a 5. I think maybe on a generous day, like a 6, but I'd say a 5 out of 10 for me. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. Or you think there's some more positives that I missed or some negatives that I missed? There's a lot to discuss. And so I hope you guys are excited for episode 7. I think I'm not really excited anymore. I'm more just like, I'm interested to see what they do going forward, given what they've changed. And I'll see you guys all back for our Percy Jackson review on Friday and doing another one of these next week as well. So thank you guys all for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.